Hello, everyone. In a peaceful little town near the border, where a synagogue and a mosque stood not far apart, there lived a rabbi named Ezra. He was known as a charismatic yet stubborn religious figure. While respected by his congregation, his worldview was filled with hatred toward Islam and Muslims. To Ezra, Islam was a threat that needed to be opposed. Every sermon he delivered in the synagogue was laced with mockery and accusations against Muslims. However, his hatred reached a peak one day that would change everything. In the bustling marketplace, Ezra confronted a Muslim man named Hassan. Hassan was well known as an honest merchant who always smiled at everyone, even those who disliked him. But to Ezra, Hassan's smile felt like provocation, as if mocking his beliefs. Without any clear reason, Ezra hurled harsh insults at Hassan in front of many people. "You and your religion only spread lies," he shouted angrily. Everyone fell silent, waiting for Hassan's reaction. To their surprise, Hassan simply bowed his head, smiled, and calmly said, "May God guide you to the truth." Those words made Ezra even angrier. How could someone he had insulted so severely not retaliate at all? He carried that sense of dissatisfaction with him into the synagogue that evening. Standing at the altar, gazing at the dimly lit synagogue, he felt the burning rage within him. In a fit of emotion, Ezra did something he had never imagined before. He lit a fire in one corner of the synagogue, burning some old scriptures that he believed were no longer relevant. The fire spread quickly, and in an instant, the entire room was filled with smoke. Ezra walked out, leaving the fire raging with one intention. He would blame the Muslims for the incident. The next day, the town was in an uproar. The synagogue had burned almost entirely to the ground. Members of the synagogue flocked to the scene, furious and demanding retribution against the Muslim community. Ezra, with a cold expression, delivered his speech. "This is proof of their hatred toward us. They don't want us to stand here." But something unexpected happened. Hassan and several other Muslim men came to the ruins of the synagogue with aid. They offered to help clean up the debris and even donated building materials. Hassan, with the same smile as before, said, "We are neighbors. It is our duty to help each other, not to blame one another." Ezra stood frozen, unable to say a word. The hatred he had built so strongly was met with kindness by Hassan and his community. Though outwardly he maintained a hateful demeanor, deep within, something began to stir. Thus began Ezra's journey toward change. From the flames of hatred he had ignited himself. Ezra felt troubled. Every time he closed his eyes, Hassan's calm, smiling face appeared in his mind. He hated this reality. How could a man he had insulted so gravely, who should have been angry or vengeful, respond instead with kindness? To forget the events at the market and synagogue, Ezra locked himself in his house for several days. However, he couldn't escape the whispers of his own conscience. Every time he tried to calm himself, the memory of Hassan's hands and the Muslim community helping to clean the synagogue kept haunting him. Finally, one morning, Ezra decided to return to the market. He walked with his head held high, trying to project the usual aura of confidence. But deep inside, he felt as if all eyes were judging him. In the market, he encountered Hassan again. Hassan was busy arranging his merchandise, but when he saw Ezra, he immediately smiled and greeted him warmly. "Rabbi Ezra, how are you today?" Hassan asked, as if nothing had ever happened between them. Ezra felt a tightness in his chest. He wanted to respond harshly, but all that came out was a faint mumble. Hassan, unfazed, offered him a glass of cold water from his small thermos. "You must be tired. Please have a drink. It's on me." Hassan said casually. Ezra hesitated, but for some reason he took the glass. As the cold water flowed down his throat, Ezra felt something soften in his heart, easing a bit of his hatred. However, he quickly steeled himself again. Don't be fooled by his kindness, he thought. But Hassan didn't stop there. He started a simple conversation, asking about Ezra's family, the synagogue, and daily life. Ezra, who initially answered curtly and briefly, found himself speaking more than he intended. Hassan never interrupted or showed signs of impatience. At the end of their conversation, Hassan said, "If there's anything we've done that has hurt you, Rabbi, I personally apologize. There's nothing better than living side by side in peace." Those words pierced Ezra like a sword. He knew Hassan was not to blame for the synagogue incident, yet the man apologized as if he wanted to bear the burden of others. On his way home, Ezra felt more exhausted than usual. Not physically, but because his heart was filled with questions. That night, Ezra sat in his study, surrounded by holy books. His gaze fell upon the shelf that held the Quran, a gift from one of his old friends who had since converted to Islam. Ezra had always ignored the book, seeing it as a threat. But tonight, his curiosity overcame his hatred. Carefully, he opened the first page. He read the Bismillah, even though his heart was full of doubt. The first verses he read felt strange to him, simple yet so powerful. The words seemed to break through the walls of his ego. He read further, trying to find a flaw in Islam. However, what he found instead was an unexpected beauty and peace. The next day, Ezra returned to the market. This time, he approached Hassan with a question that had been troubling his mind. "Why do you still smile even though I have insulted your religion?" he asked sharply. Hassan smiled faintly and looked at Ezra with an understanding gaze. "Because my religion teaches that revenge brings no good, Rabbi. Our prophet taught us to respond to evil with kindness. I'm just trying to follow that." Ezra was silent. The answer was so simple, yet it shook his entire belief system. For the first time, he felt that his hatred had no solid foundation. Within him, a conflict began to intensify. That day marked the beginning of Ezra's journey to seek the answers he had long avoided. Ezra no longer felt at peace within himself. Every night, he lay awake, thinking about his conversation with Hassan. The simple words of the man echoed in his ears, "Respond to evil with goodness." Ezra tried to dismiss them, but something inside him began to falter. In his study, he sat in front of a shelf full of holy books. His gaze once again fell upon the Quran, a book he had previously read with the intent of finding faults. But this time, a different feeling arose. It wasn't hatred, but a deep curiosity. Ezra opened the Quran again. He read verses about justice, compassion, and forgiveness. The more he read, the more he felt that the book spoke directly to his heart. The verses about patience and the importance of responding to evil with goodness seemed so relevant to Hassan's attitude. Yet, Ezra's ego did not entirely surrender. He wanted to know more, but he also feared the truth he might find. In the nights that followed, he kept reading, secretly, without anyone knowing. On every page, he discovered things that moved his heart, but he was still looking for reasons to deny them. One day, Ezra decided to test the Muslim community directly. He went to the small mosque in the town, disguising himself in simple clothes so that he wouldn't be recognized. He sat in a corner of the mosque's courtyard, observing the worshippers coming in for prayer. He expected to find disorder, chaos, or flaws, but what he saw was tranquility and unity. When the prayer began, Ezra was stunned to see how everyone, from different backgrounds, stood in line without distinguishing their status or rank. He watched as they all bowed together, submitting completely to God. The scene touched something deep inside Ezra, something he had never felt in the synagogue. After the prayer ended, Hassan, who had apparently spotted Ezra from a distance, approached him. "Rabbi Ezra?" Hassan greeted him with his characteristic smile. Ezra was surprised but did not flee. He felt something was keeping him rooted to the spot. "I just wanted to see," he said briefly, trying to mask his unease. Hassan did not press him. He simply nodded and invited Ezra into the mosque to sit and talk. Ezra hesitated for a moment, but eventually followed Hassan. Inside, the atmosphere was peaceful. Ezra felt welcomed, even though he knew that most of the congregation recognized him as the rabbi who had once insulted Islam. Yusuf realized that his journey was far from over. However, he knew that the fire of hatred that once burned in his heart had been extinguished, replaced by the light of Islam that guided him towards peace. He now stood as a living testament that guidance can come through the most unexpected paths, even from the flames of hatred he had kindled himself.